and Caicos. Here we are again, another Thursday afternoon, and this is the Patriot Hour. As you may know, throughout this month, we will be looking at what we're calling our 4 for 40. 40 years of ministerial government here in the Turks and Caicos Islands. Last week, we dealt with 1976 to 1986, and now we're going to look at 86 to 96. And I have a wonderful guest with me. Hopefully, we'll have another come along soon, but we'll get started anyway. And I will ask him to introduce himself and let us know where were you or what were you doing during this time period that we'll be discussing today.
Good afternoon, Turks and Caicos. My name is Willette Swann. And 70, 90, what was it, 86 to 96?
Yes.
I was in Turks and Caicos, starting out the year 1986 in a grocery store, and ending that year and the few years after that in air traffic control, and also during that decade. I contested the seat in the bike.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So, but what I wanted to say really before we get into any of this, I was depending on the other guests, and I wish I could talk about that period without getting myself into political trouble. So I'll try to talk about the events rather than the person. And if it sounds like an endorsement, let me put this disclaimer out there that I'm not endorsing any person or party. Well, I could endorse some older guys, but I don't want to endorse anybody who came into the political system after 1967.
Okay, all right.
Right?
Okay.
So my endorsees are James Walken, Paul Higgs, Gus Lightbourne, people like them. Though they are the persons that I. The only person who came in after 1967 would be James McCartney, seeing that all our political parties have, accepted him as somebody who ought to be endorsed. I can endorse Honorable McCartney.
Okay. Well, we know a lot about Honorable McCartney already. And looking at the time period 1986 to 96, the other names that you called, they were older men at the time, correct?
Yes, were
they still active?
Turks and Caicos only got a full adult suffrage after I was alive. Imagine that?
Wow.
That I am older than full adult suffrage in Turks and Caicos, and I'm a young guy.
Yeah,
right?
You are.
In 1956, it was Paul Higgs really who was the impetus behind us getting the what we call the trial elections in 1956. Okay. He stood up. Well, he was trying to stand up for a long time before he was, and somebody was pulling him down until he could actually stand up and say what was on his mind. And what was on his mind was that we ought to be able to vote for our representation ourselves. And of course, he got that, and we had that what was called the trial elections, just with no strings attached.
Okay, yeah.
Right? In 1956. So the first real elections where things counted was 1959.
Okay.
And the gentlemen that I endorse, besides McCartney, those gentlemen were in that batch in 1959.
Okay.
Yeah.
So by the time period we were talking about, they weren't.
They were out. They were all out of politics.
Okay, but let me.
That's
ask
why
you
I'm not
this.
scared to endorse them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: what do you think during the time period we're looking at, the 10 years? what do you think their impact was on it at that time, even though they weren't in it anymore?
They had profound impact. A couple of things. First, the decision to not go along with Jamaica when Jamaica became independent in 1962. Those gentlemen made that decision on our behalf. And the second thing was starting the tourism here on Providenciales and the Caicos Islands. So they were the group that got things started. Without them, 86 would have probably looked a lot different than it did. Yeah.
And you know, I was 4 years old in 1986. So what did the country look like at that time?
Well, at that time, 1986 began. The economy was stagnant. One of our stagnant periods. Actually, when the economy started to pick up in 1987, it lasted 20 years. We had that good 20-year run that just finished in 2007. Right? So they started with a very stagnant economy. We had a rough political period. That 86 was the year when what was it like then? We had the personal telephone did not exist. Actually, the following year was the first time I got a house phone, 1987.
Wow.
Okay? But the personal telephone did not exist. We had already gone past a lot of the things that Honorable McCartney had put in place. The right, excellent McCartney had put in place. We have to give him that name now. For example, we no longer had our national airlines. We were already in the era. It is about that time where we began to have workers in the workforce without representation. Those kinds of things were in that era. That was when we started immigration controls, work permit controls in that era.
Okay. And in your opinion, what was the political climate like at that time? Here we were 10 years later from the first time we had elections for ministerial government. And so what was it like during those 10 years?
Much like today, where the parties were, were really separated. I'm looking for another word. Where they were polarized. Much like we are today. Difficult for people to come together and really communicate with each other. We spoke past each other just like we do today. And instead of listening, we just waited for our turn to speak. In 1986, the economy was restarted, I think, with some construction jobs that were the result of insurance monies from insurance claims from Hurricane Kate. We had Hurricane Kate in November of '85 that did some damage, and then there were some insured homes that needed to be repaired, and that money started flowing. And so a little bit of activity began then. Remember, we had just gotten into tourism business, really gotten into it. Our tourism started in 1970, you could say, with the Admiral's Arms in South Caicos and Pine Key. But it really started where we had any numbers with the opening of Club Med at the end of 1984. So we had really just gotten into tourism. We'd just gotten the the new international airport opened at Providenciales, and you know we had flights, and those numbers were starting to come, and there were people employed in tourism in
Okay.
larger numbers.
Okay. You know, it's really surprising sometimes when we look back, because it makes us realize how young we are in certain regards.
Yes,
You know,
that's something I am susceptible to as well, but I have difficulty with our people doing it. We compare ourselves with old democracies in
yes,
North
we do.
America
We
and
do.
Europe, right? Man, we can't compare ourselves. Like you know, I'm older than Turks and Caicos.
Yeah.
You know, we say we had sophistication, like we had the presidency in the 1800s, or that 1800s, 1700s, whenever that was. But that wasn't real. That was for only for those few persons who were landed.
Yeah.
The first time we had full adult suffrage that mattered was in 1959, and I was alive.
So that's really not that long ago.
Not
That's
that long
really
ago.
not. That's
Not that
you
long
know,
ago.
and compared to other countries, that's just a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
You know, so there's really a lot of, in a lot of ways, we need to grow. But let's look at social development for a little bit. What were some of the projects, some of the development with regards to people that were going on during that time?
Well, we were doing some interesting things. Like I say, we were just coming into tourism, so there was plenty to develop. We had missteps. We had a commission of inquiry that year in
Yes.
1986.
Okay.
And I don't know, maybe that helped to put a drag on the
Okay.
economy. There was a proposal for a project that we used West Caicos as a dumping ground. You know, that could hold
Wow.
some refuse from New York. But of course, that became a big social topic. I remember the song, "Solely in the Gang" was, alive and kicking back then, and they did a song, "We Don't Want It."
Well, you know, it's a good thing we didn't want it. I don't, you know, I think there are certain things you have to just say no to. But
Yeah.
looking back on it, you know, I think, and I'm sure you would agree, it's good that we didn't go in that direction.
Yeah, imagine the value of the land on West Caicos, and imagine the value of Turks and Caicos,
Yeah.
because I have difficulty, and very often you hear persons talk about this island, when they mean Turks and
Turks and
Caicos.
Caicos, yes,
right?
yeah.
And so if you had refuse on the island, then you know that's a problem. That's what our islands would have come to be known for,
Yeah.
and you could forget the tourism that we see today.
Yes, we definitely wouldn't have that. I don't think so. It's like I said, it's good that we didn't do it. Now, one of the, I would say, areas of social development during that time period was the Clement Howell High School came into existence here in Providenciales. In your opinion, what did that mean for Providenciales and for the Turks and Caicos?
Well, the Seventh-day Adventists provided I believe the building. One of our citizens provided the property. They provided the building, and started.
Okay.
1985, okay? And by 2 years later, by 1987, the government had gotten together and put up, the beginnings of the school, with an additional property that belonged to another citizen. So we got started. What it meant? Well, it meant a whole lot. It meant that our children no longer had to go and live in Grand Turk, South Caicos, or North Caicos in order to go to school. When we started, I think a few of our persons who were already going to school in one of those islands came and started school at home. So that made a whole lot of difference. Back then, we were a little more prudish.
In what sense?
Like some of us wouldn't allow our girl children to go and live with somebody else out of our sight and go to school, and so that made it now possible that the girls in more numbers would attend high school. So huge difference maker there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the first commission of inquiry in 1986.
Well, that was the second.
I'm sorry. See, this is why we need people who know. I thought it was the first.
That was the second.
Okay.
The first one, in our era, came after the 1975 the Junkanoo incident.
Okay. Yes.
When we inquired into conditions happening then. Now, I only attended one of those sessions, and I don't remember except for the introduction of one of the witnesses. That's all I remember.
So, do you recall what the impact was on the people in the country at the time? What how did that affect the climate, for lack of a better word?
Well,
in your
let me go back and then come forward.
Okay.
What I was a high school student. I was in Grand Turk in high school, and we were having this difficult period where things were happening, and I didn't understand them.
Okay,
My English teacher did a double period. The period was 45 minutes, so an hour and a half, talking to us about things that were going on. How there were certain persons who were working in the government, certain officers working in the government, that were treated different from him and his caliber of persons, Caribbean people. And he was talking about racism and all these things, and I didn't have a clue. After an hour and a half, I had no clue.
Wow.
I was just totally confused. Right? But I happened to be where I shouldn't have been. I should have been home doing homework or in bed. But I was at one of the places playing pool on the night of the Junkanoo incident. And 3 officers came in. 2 that does not belong to Turks and Caicos, and 1 belonged to Turks and Caicos. The one who belonged to Turks and Caicos being led by the 2 who does not belong.
Okay, yeah.
And they just went past us. Well, first they passed the manager who was sitting outside on the banister eating a plate of the food.
Okay.
Right? But they passed him, never said, good evening or anything like that. Just passed him. Just passed us. They're playing pool. And they went into the employees only area. Right? But the manager got in there just as the last one was about to step in the door. And he gave him on the shoulder. That was the Tux Island officer, and pulled him around and said, what are you doing? Right?
Okay.
You got 3 stripes on your shoulder. He got 3 stripes on his shoulder. Don't let him lead you around. You're home. You tell him that you can't go back there. That's employers only area. Right? So that's what I remember from that. That was my experience. That's my involvement.
Okay. So that was the one in 1975.
That was 75,
okay, yeah.
and of course the Junkanoo incident that others could give you more details
Yes.
on. But I went to school the following day, and everybody that's all the conversation, and we closed school. We closed school on June 5th, June 6th.
Okay.
Yeah, we closed school, and we never came back until late August. And that year,
Okay, yeah.
that year, the graduation ceremonies, etc., was in September rather than in July.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know it had that much of an impact on the schools, and I knew it had a big impact, but I didn't realize that schools closed. So,
Well, I don't know about all the schools,
okay,
but mine did.
okay, yours did.
Well,
All right.
I imagine other schools in Grand Turk
Yeah.
may have closed as
Okay.
well. Yeah.
Okay, so it was more in Grand Turk that it wasn't like
Yeah,
I would say,
it-
necessarily countrywide or anything like that.
I don't think
Okay.
anything happened in the other islands.
Okay.
And of course, once all that had taken place, I believe that accelerated our process toward the Constitution, and that Constitution came into force the following year. So we're talking about 1976, right? That's how come we're talking about these decades.
Yes, yes. So, what about 1986? That the Commission of Inquiry then?
That Commission of Inquiry was regarding us, our politicians, mostly, regarding an incident where there was a fire at Bascom House that used to be our education office.
Okay.
And as a result of the commission, the Constitution was suspended, and we had advisory government until 1988. We got the Constitution that, for the first time, brought multi-member constituencies, and it was unfair in that in some constituencies you had 2 members. So I voted in a constituency that had 3 members. So I had 3 votes when other
Okay.
people had 2, and other constituencies had
Okay.
2. I moved back to Grand Turk. I finished high school, come live in Providence Hills, moved back to Grand Turk in 1986 because that was the year we established our terminal control area, approach control.
Okay.
And I moved to Grand Turk to work in approach control. Before that, all we had was just aerodrome zones. The aerodrome zone is 1,500 feet, 5 miles around your airport, centered on your airport.
Okay.
So we now had a control area that was bigger, gone like halfway between here and Mayaguana and gone east of Grand Turk, and so we've got a big area that we're controlling.
Okay.
And I believe it was at that time up to 7,000 feet. So from 1,500, you're a real controller now.
Yeah,
You're in the big
yeah.
leagues. So I moved back to Grand Turk, and so I was there in 1988, where I was lucky to have more votes than some other persons who
Okay.
only had 2, and we did that twice, 1988 and 1991.
Okay.
We had one constituency that had 3 members, and then we had one constituency that had 2 members, and it was unfair.
So would it be similar to the all-island candidates today in some constituencies where you have the opportunity to vote for more than one person? I'm not sure if I understand.
That's the only similarity.
Okay.
That's the only similarity where you could vote for more than one person. Where it was possible for somebody to vote for, a person in their party, and then somebody else outside of that party.
Okay.
Yeah. Rather than just the one vote where you had to do it, that one time. You had another option.
Okay. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around it, and I'm sure there will be others who didn't realize that it was like that. Person's in my age group who may not have known about that.
Yeah, we did it. We did the 2 elections. The first one in 1988, I believe there were only two parties that actually contended.
Okay.
And in 1991, I think there was like four parties or maybe just three that contested. And I'm thinking about 1988. It would have been the PDM and PNP, and 91 it probably would have been NDA and TCUP.
Okay.
I'm not sure that TCUP actually had candidates, but NDA did have candidates.
Okay. So, can you just let us know what the those parties stood for in terms of NDA or TCUP? What?
NDA, National Democratic Alliance. What's
Okay.
TCUP? Turks and Caicos United Party, maybe.
Okay. All right. Okay. So now, you say that it's unfair. Is it because persons had the opportunity, like persons in certain constituencies, their votes would carry more weight because they had more persons?
Yeah.
So
That's why it was unfair.
Okay.
I can vote for three persons, and I actually chose. I was going to say that I chose to, because why register in Providence? I only got 2 votes.
Yeah. Okay.
Even my brother was one of the candidates.
Okay.
But I vote for him, man. I only got 2 votes.
Okay. But I guess it's in the past now.
No, 2 is better. 3 is better than 2.
Yeah, it is. Okay.
Go for the 3.
Yeah, it really makes sense in terms of changing that, because I agree. I feel as if certain people wouldn't have the same influence as others.
Yeah, that's how it was.
Now, just looking at it then and looking at what we have today, how would you compare the two?
Today is fair because everybody have the same 6 votes. Right? I don't know. Perhaps we could say that those persons who are voting, who are running in the constituencies, that they have to convince a fewer number of persons than those who are running all island, and so maybe the persons who are running in the all island should be in the upper house, and those who are running in the constituency should be in the lower house, or something like that. But it's fair in that every voter has 6 votes.
Okay. All right. So tell us a little bit about your political career.
Well, we formed the United Democratic Party, UDP, in, I believe it was 1994.
Okay.
Early, maybe late 93. I believe it was early 94, to contest the elections that were held in January of 95. We never really got any support.
Okay.
Like I got 13 votes. I ran in the bite, and I have 13 family members up there. So.
So, do you feel that experience discouraged you from moving forward in the political arena, or?
I don't think so, because I thought about running otherwise. It's an eye opener. I realized afterward that the timing was wrong. People considered, Turks and Caicos persons considered that 1995 elections too crucial to support this up and coming organization, and that they had to stick with their old organizations. And after a while, I understood that that's how people felt. And I thought about running again recently.
Okay. So, Now, often when we talk about our political history, we will hear about, the things that led up to the election in 1976. The Junkanoo Club, all that incident, all of that, the Black Power movement. We hear about these things. Now, in your opinion, well, let me say this first. Persons would say that people in that era were fighters. They were really pushing for, for change. Now, compared to those first 10 years to the 10 years that we're looking at, would you say that we had persons who were really fighting and pushing and...
Our historian, Sadler, Bertie, he used to say something about the people he wrote about and he talked about. He used to say, they were fantastic men. Okay? Back in that era, I said it this morning, late 60s and coming forward, the men weren't quite as fantastic.
Okay.
Okay? And yes, persons of that era were better than us.
Okay. So what's your reasoning for saying that persons of the previous era were better than the men in this particular era?
Well, my observation is that in previous eras, all of our elite were also persons of impeccable integrity.
Okay.
And starting, I say maybe in the late 60s, perhaps 70s, we have developed some elite who didn't have that kind of integrity.
Okay.
Persons were stronger physically and emotionally, and tougher. So we didn't have all these thin-skinned people. You have the tiptoe around them.
Okay.
I mean, we didn't have that in that era. I didn't say everybody was mature, but you had some persons, right? But our leaders were persons of integrity,
okay.
People you can count on. When I was growing up in Providenciales, and well, it wasn't Providenciales, it was Blue Hills,
yeah.
and in Bottle Creek. The persons that I saw as my school teachers was also a Sunday school teacher. They were the same persons who were doing Bible study and those kinds of things.
Okay.
And we didn't have a disconnect. The disconnect that
Okay.
we have today, where we think that we should compartmentalize everything, and that's yours over here, and this mine, and don't touch my area. We didn't have that compartmentalization.
Okay.
They were fantastic men.
Okay. So do you believe that persons getting ready to vote in this upcoming election, do you think that integrity in the candidates still plays a big role, or it should or shouldn't play a big role?
It should, but unfortunately, it doesn't.
Okay.
And that's because we have changed. Okay? In the era that I'm talking about, not the 86, 96 era, but in that earlier era, I'm talking about the earlier than the 70s. It mattered, and if you didn't have it, you wouldn't have gotten elected.
Okay.
The era wasn't very long, because it only started in '59, right? But in that era, if you didn't have it, you wouldn't have gotten elected.
Okay. And looking at the 10-year period, 86 to 96, what do you think the impact of women, especially in the public sector, political sector, what do you think the impact of women were during those 10 years?
Well, women came into their own in that era. We must remember before then, most of Turks and Caicos women worked at home, and we didn't have that many what we now call jobs. Right? We didn't have that. We didn't have that much formal employment. The work was in the informal sector, in the Caicos Islands, the middle north provinciales. The woman would do farming, subsistence farming. The men would do fishing, and that was the extent of it. And with the 70s, there were a few little things. We started to have persons working like in the airline.
Okay.
Persons, working in the two little hotels that we had. So things began to change like that. But in the 80s, in this era, was when our financial services industry came on strong.
Okay.
And many of our young women landed jobs in that industry and grew with it. And then, of course, with all the financial industries, there would be, if you've got the financial and the tourism as well, there must be services to cater to those industries.
Yes.
So that was the era that women came into the workforce and made a difference.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that was the era. I believe I said this before. That was the era when we begin to see workers without representation.
Yeah.
When we had employment before then, we had salt, for example, in South Caicos, and the salt workers. Not to say that things weren't tough, but the salt workers in South Caicos were unionized.
Okay.
Up until 1963, when salt died.
Okay.
Okay? Salt workers were unionized. Okay? What the Right Excellent McCartney did was brought into effect the Fair Labor Standards Ordinance.
Okay.
Now, this is interesting in that he died early in May, 8th, 9th, thereabouts in May, early in May, and the ordinance came into effect on the 1st June.
Okay.
So it's just a matter of weeks. So he never, ever had time to operate it. And it's left for Turks and Caicos Islanders to wonder what would have happened if he had had the time to operate it. Because by a decade later, it didn't exist. We had gutted the Fair Labor Standards. 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week was something the French had in the 1600s. The rest of the world, the UK and the US, had it in the 1880s. They made it standard. When the ILO came into being in 1919, that was the first standard. Hours of work was the very first standard the ILO did in 1919. 8 hours, 40 hours. Right? And McCartney had that in his ordinance was in line with the international labor standards.
Okay.
Right? How we get back to 44 hours a week and 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
And the international labor standard, the vacation is 3 weeks per year, and maximum hours is 60 hours per week. How we get 72, how we get 2 weeks, how we get all those numbers bad like that. I don't know how we did it, but right now, in the U.S., President Obama is trying to ensure that Hillary Clinton wins the election for his own, you might say, personal reasons, so that he would have a legacy. All the things that he did would still be in place, and that he'd have a legacy. And what we have done was try to destroy McCartney's legacy. Like almost everything he did, we have turned our back on it, so that now, you say persons your age would be asking the question, what have you done?
Yeah.
It looked like he haven't done anything,
because
we have undone most things that he did.
Wow.
And the Fair Labor Standards is just one of those things that we have undone, totally undone.
So our country might have looked totally different if he
was able to operate that ordinance. Yeah, I hear our persons who are running. I hear them talking about, we had to find a way to get our persons involved economically. This is for free. You don't have to pay for this, guys. Wages and benefits. That's the answer. That's the way. Right? Get our people working. Get some good social dialogue going so that they can get some good benefits, and that's your answer. That's how it's done. Wages and benefits. Look at it 10 years later.
So basically, they don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already there, something that they can look at.
That's how it's done. You want our people involved, wages and benefits. Minimum wage ain't going to cut it.
Okay, all right. And one more, I'd say a few more questions, but one question with regards to the Right Honorable Jags McCartney.
Right, excellent.
All right, excellent. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the correction. Why is it that you think we moved away from the vision that he had as a people?
I said that our elite weren't persons of integrity.
Okay.
That's why we did it.
Wow. Because it's interesting. We speak a lot about him now, but it seems as if we are way off course from, as the more I understand about him, I get to know about him, we're way off course. And it's the question is, what happened?
Yeah.
What happened? But anyway,
we lost our way. Yeah.
Now we're getting ready to wrap up now, and my final question for you is: do you feel that looking at 1986 to 1996 and where we are today, do you believe that as a people we are more united or more divided?
Ooh. I would have to say more divided, as I remember us in. It was a different. There were different things going on. There were different conditions. When we opened the airport and Club Med, and in the early '80s through '86. It was very, very clear where we, as we call ourselves indigenous Turks and Caicos Islanders, where we stood. We were all more alike in that we didn't have the huge disparities as far as material ownership.
Okay.
Yes, there were disparities, but there wouldn't widespread huge disparities like we have today. It was easy for the Right Excellent McCartney to know where he stood in an employment dispute. Right? He knew where the voters were and where the non-voters were. That's the way it was. They were on opposite sides. What we have come to now is like in other countries where we have voters on both sides of that divide, and so it's a little more difficult for for our persons to take those strong positions
Okay.
like we did back then. And when I said that, I remember some incidents I had trying to move the orders I was just talking about, trying to move them into the modern time.
Okay.
Right? I remember some incidents that I had where persons threatened the minister.
Wow.
So he couldn't do it. Couldn't change those numbers. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now looking at your background, being the former commissioner of labor, do you feel that we're on the right track in that regard?
I plead the fifth.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll leave it there then.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Swann, I really appreciated this conversation. It was very informative. And Turks and Caicos, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So thanks for being here. And Turks and Caicos, we ask that you join us again next week, next Thursday afternoon, as we continue the 4 for 40 series. And enjoy the rest of your day.